I would like to start by going back to June 15, 2009. 3 days had passed since the presidential election. The announced results were not as many Iranians had expected. It was shocking. Despite well-grounded evidences of fraud, Ahmadinejad had claimed victory by a landslide. Members of the Guardian Council, who were responsible for examining the credibility of the results and were expected not to take sides, had already supported Ahmadinejad weeks prior to the election. The Supreme Leader himself had congratulated him for his victory. Streets had been packed with armed revolutionary guards and pro-government semi-militia besieges. Everything was at odds with what might give us hope, except one thing. For months prior to the election, tens of thousands of Iranians had been occupying public spaces, chanting, "If fraud happens, Iran will become the Armageddon. That is, don't cheat, or we will claim our votes in the streets." Those slogans were still echoing in our heads and on our lips. Our solidarity was our power. I was a student of mechanical engineering at Sharif University of Technology at that time. Like many other Iranians, I was involved in pre-election presidential campaigns. In the student movement, we were fighting for our basic and fundamental rights. During the first 4-year presidency of Ahmadinejad, most of the democratically elected student bodies across the country had got shut down. Hundreds of students, including my friend Ziya Nabavi, had been banned from continuing their education for speaking up their minds. Many others, including my friends Majid Tawakkoli and Bahare Hidayat, had been arrested and sentenced to years in prison. Professors who were not expressing their loyalty to the regime had been compulsively retired. University guards had become agents of the security forces. They were reporting the activities of students to security officials and helping intelligence agencies to arrest us. It was 8:30 in the morning of Monday, June 15, 2009, when I arrived at Sharif University of Technology. My university was located near Azadi Street, a strategic location for protesters. Unlike any other day, hundreds of other students had already gathered in the main yard. They were distributing Mir Hossein Mousavi's statements. He had invited the official to respect the law and had called for civil and non-violent protests. Since early hours after the election, several politicians, journalists, lawyers, and prominent grassroots activists had been arrested. Reformist newspapers, internet, and even cell phones had been shut down, and the state media had started its pro-Ahmadinejad propaganda. History had taught us not to have trust in the system. Occupying the streets in mass numbers was the only remaining way of expressing discontent. It was 10 in the morning. We had been told that security forces had permission to kill protesters with their snipers. Despite the possible threats, some of my friends and I decided to leave the university and start marching in the street. We were 100. That was the first time since 1999 students' uprisings that we were chanting anti-dictatorship slogans out of university campus. It was a historical moment. Half an hour later, our numbers got thousands. The unprecedented specter of fear and hope was haunting Tehran. Moments later, I could not find my student friends anymore. I got lost in the crowd. Not hundreds or thousands, but millions of Iranians, men, women, children, young, old, from different social classes, were marching in the Azadi street. On that day, 7 people, including Sohrab Arabi, got killed. I left my country in September 2009 to Budapest, Hungary, 4 months after the election. Had I lived in Iran a few more months, I would have ended up in prison for violating national security, making propaganda against the regime, and insulting the Supreme Leader. They were common charges against protesters. State media was calling us CIA agents who intended to disrupt the country. They were false, shameful, and disgusting accusations. The Iranian Democratic Green Movement is rooted in more than a century struggle of Iranians for freedom and justice. And it is constituted of, but could not be reduced to, students, women, and workers' movements, with the overall aim of not necessarily toppling the whole regime down, but appreciating human dignity and respectability. It is anything but a CIA plot. 2 years and 9 months have passed, and it's the 7th month that I am at US. Now we are facing different social and political realities. Iranian Green Movement has been harshly cracked down. US has pushed for crippling economic sanctions against Iranian people, and Israel and US warmongers are threatening Iranians with military aggression. It is abundantly clear that the recent unprecedented sanctions are going to have a negative effect on Iran's economy. They will lead to reduction in GDP, higher unemployment, inflation, and widening the gap between the rich and the poor. Lives of teachers, white-collar workers, laborers, and vulnerable members of the society who are working hard to make a living are hurt the most. Sanctions are not alternative to war. They are war by definition. Undoubtedly, sanctions and threat of war will also weaken the Iranian democratic movement. They provide a pretext for the Iranian government to escalate its repressive measures against labor, women, student, and other progressive movements, make people more dependent on the authoritative state to meet their daily needs, and increase social tensions, poverty, and enemies. A disempowered society loses its capacities of resistance against state repression. In the light of these concerns, on February 4th, 2012, on day of mass action against a possible war with Iran, hundreds of us went to the streets of New York to oppose war, sanction, and of course, to stand in solidarity with the Iranian struggle for freedom and justice. Not everybody agreed with us on this last point. Some leftist activists in the protests were trying to silence us. They made efforts to tear our placard, block our march, and even beat and took microphone from one of the speakers, who is now here, while she was expressing her solidarity with the Iranian Green Movement. One American protester who made several speeches at the rally here in New York approached me, looked into my face, and overtly accused us of being CIA agents. Her words instantly took me back to Tehran, to 2 years and 9 months ago, when Iranian protesters were risking their freedom and lives for liberty and economic justice, had to bear the same accusations. That American protester in New York was not a semi-militia Basiji member, nor was she being paid by Islamic Republic to silence Iranian dissidents. But her legitimate anti-war, anti-imperialist approach had pushed her too far to illegitimately stand beside the Iranian dictators. But the story has one more dimension. The Iranian state media and the notorious Press TV, which has the records of broadcasting the forced confessions of Iranian political prisoners, were also present at the demonstration on February 4th, 2012 here in New York. They had hard time on that day. The mass presence of anti-war, anti-sanction, and simultaneously anti-state repression Iranians and their allies had made it difficult for Iranian state media to have coverage. Yet, they eventually managed to make several interviews and took some pictures. On February 5th, 2012, the front page of hardline newspapers in Iran was a picture of the anti-war protests in New York with an eye-catching title, quote, "Supporters of Islamic Republic in US marched against war," end quote. That is, here in US, we were shamefully called CIA agents, and there in Iran, we were ridiculously addressed as supporters of Islamic Republic. But we are, in fact, neither of them. My friends and I, who have recently formed a group called Havaar, the Iranian Initiative Against War, Sanctions, and State Repression, who some of the members are also present here, would like to invite leftist activists in US and those who are present in the anti-war movement globally for a new way of resistance. While we are trapped between foreign imperialists and domestic dictators, we believe that there's a way out of this cycle. We have to make it clear that our anti-war and anti-sanction position is not equal to support for Iranian government. This does not mean lending our support to any specific political group or individual in Iran. It rather means standing in solidarity with Iranian struggle for social and political freedoms, economical justice, and judicial transparency. Any anti-war statement or action
which stays silent on this issue will be hijacked by Islamic Republic and will be used as part of propaganda machine against Iranian people. Standing beside Iranians' labor and other progressive movements does not at all mean supporting foreign intervention for regime change. We have to be explicit about it. We are calling for self-determination. Iranians must have the right to freely determine their own government without foreign intervention or external compulsion. The majority of political prisoners in Iran and families of those who were murdered by Iranian government are also against war, against sanctions, and against foreign intervention. Most Iranians in US are on the same boat. Without showing them our solidarity, we make an anti-war movement which not only serves the interest of Islamic Republic, as Larry Evans also says, serves the interest of imperialists as well, but leaves Iranians alone in their struggle for liberty and justice. I would like to end by bringing a quote from the brilliant article of Raha, the Iranian feminist collective, titled Solidarity and Its Discontents. The article goes, quote, "There is no contradiction between opposing every instance of US meddling in Iran and every other country and supporting the popular democratic struggles of ordinary Iranians against dictatorship. Effective international solidarity requires that the two go hand in hand. We are calling for a rethinking of what internationalism and international solidarity means for the vantage point of activists working in the US. Internationalism has to start from below, from the differently articulated aspirations of mass movements against state militarism, dictatorship, economic crisis, gender, sexual, religious, class, and ethnic oppression in Iran, in the US, and all over the world." Thank you.